In the autumn of 2001, in a small Idaho town where neighbors still left their doors unlocked and children rode their bicycles until the streetlights came on, a mother named Jennifer Hayes vanished from her own bedroom in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Her 3-year-old daughter was napping down the hall. Her husband was supposed to be at work. When deputies arrived at the modest ranch-style home on Maple Creek Road just after 5 in the evening, they found the front door standing open, a pot of soup burning on the stove, and a silence so complete it seemed to swallow sound. Jennifer Hayes, 28 years old, a Sunday school teacher and part-time bookkeeper, had simply ceased to exist within the walls of her own home. The question that would haunt Clearwater County for nearly 2 decades was not just what happened to Jennifer Hayes, but who could make a person disappear so thoroughly that not a single trace remained. Clearwater County sits in the northern panhandle of Idaho, a landscape of dense pine forests and winding mountain roads where cell phone reception fades in and out, and the nearest hospital is 43 miles away. The town of Riverside, population just under 2,000, clusters along the banks of the Clearwater River, its main street lined with a hardware store, a diner that serves breakfast all day, and a single stoplight that blinks yellow after 9 at night. In 2001, most families in Riverside had lived there for generations. Everyone knew everyone. The high school football team was the pride of the town. People left their car keys in the ignition at the grocery store. Jennifer Marie Caldwell had grown up in Riverside, graduated from Clearwater High in 1991, and married Thomas Hayes in the summer of 1997 in a ceremony at the First Baptist Church, where her grandmother had been married 40 years before. Those who knew Jennifer described her as quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered your birthday and brought casseroles when someone was sick. She kept a garden behind the house where she grew tomatoes and green beans. She volunteered at the elementary school library every Thursday morning. Her daughter, Emma, had just turned 3 that September. Thomas Hayes had come to Riverside in 1995, hired as a machinist at the lumber mill 12 miles outside town. He was 31 years old when he married Jennifer, a man of few words who kept to himself but showed up on time for his shifts and never caused trouble. He drove a 1994 Ford pickup truck, dark green, with a dent in the passenger side door. Neighbors said he mowed his lawn every Saturday morning in the summer. He drank coffee black. He did not attend church with his wife, but waited in the truck reading the newspaper while she and Emma went inside. The morning of October 16, 2001, began like any other Tuesday in the Hayes household. Jennifer woke at 6:30, made breakfast for Emma, scrambled eggs and toast cut into triangles the way the child preferred. Thomas left for work at 7:15, the same time he always left, his lunch packed in a black cooler, his thermos filled with coffee. Jennifer waved from the kitchen window. Those who have ever established routines so familiar they become invisible will understand how these small rituals can become the foundation of a life, and how their disruption can signal that something fundamental has shifted. Clears throat. At 9:45 that morning, Jennifer dropped Emma off at her mother's house on Cedar Avenue, a 10-minute drive from Maple Creek Road. Jennifer's mother, Carol Caldwell, later told investigators that Jennifer seemed perfectly normal. She was wearing jeans and a blue sweater. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She said she had errands to run and would pick Emma up around 3 in the afternoon. She kissed her daughter goodbye. She backed her white Honda Civic out of the driveway. Carol Caldwell stood at the window and watched her daughter drive away. It was the last time she would see her alive. At approximately 2:30 that afternoon, a neighbor named Margaret Chen was walking her dog past the Hayes residence when she noticed the front door was open. Not just unlocked, but standing wide open. This detail would matter. Margaret Chen knew Jennifer well enough to know that Jennifer never left doors open, especially not when it was getting cold outside. The October wind was picking up, scattering leaves across the yard. Margaret Chen hesitated, then walked up to the porch and called through the screen door. No answer. She knocked. Still nothing. She told investigators later that something felt wrong in a way she could not articulate, the kind of wrongness that sits in your stomach. Margaret Chen went home and called Jennifer's mother. Carol Caldwell immediately tried calling the house. No answer. She tried Jennifer's cell phone. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. At 3:15, when Jennifer had not arrived to pick up Emma, Carol Caldwell drove to Maple Creek Road herself. She found the front door still open. The television was on in the living room, playing a cooking show to an empty couch. In the kitchen, a pot of soup had burned down to a black crust on the bottom. The burner was still on. Carol Caldwell turned it off with shaking hands. She walked through the house calling her daughter's name. The bedroom looked undisturbed. The bed was made. Jennifer's purse sat on the dresser, her wallet and keys inside. Her cell phone was on the kitchen counter, plugged into its charger. In Emma's room, the child's toys were arranged neatly on the shelf. The bathroom door was open, the light off. Carol Caldwell stood in the hallway and felt the silence press against her eardrums. She called the sheriff's department at 3:42 in the afternoon. Deputy Michael Torres arrived at 3:57. He was 26 years old, had been with the department for 3 years, and had never worked a missing person case before. He walked through the house with Carol Caldwell, noting everything she had already observed. The open door, the burned soup, the purse and phone. He asked if Jennifer had seemed upset or troubled. Carol Caldwell said no, absolutely not. He asked if there were problems in the marriage. Carol Caldwell hesitated for just a moment before saying she did not think so. By 4:30, 2 more deputies had arrived. They searched the property, the yard, the small shed behind the house where Thomas kept his tools. They found nothing disturbed, nothing missing except Jennifer herself. Deputy Torres called Thomas Hayes at the lumber mill. Thomas answered on the second ring. Deputy Torres explained that Jennifer was missing, that her car was in the driveway but she was not home. Thomas Hayes was silent for several seconds. Then he said he would come home right away. Thomas Hayes arrived at 5:23 in the evening, pulling into his driveway behind the 2 sheriff's department vehicles. He climbed out of his truck slowly, a tall man with dark hair and oil stains on his work shirt. Deputies watched him approach the house. They noted later in their reports that his face showed no particular emotion. Not fear, not confusion, not panic. He walked up to Deputy Torres and asked what was going on. His voice was steady. Inside the house, Thomas Hayes stood in the living room and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. Deputies asked him questions. When had he left for work? 7:15. Had he spoken to Jennifer during the day? No. Did she have any reason to leave? Not that he knew of. Did she know anyone who might want to hurt her? No. Where did he think she might be? He said he had no idea. He said these things in the same flat tone, his hands hanging at his sides. Sheriff Robert Kendrick arrived just before 6. He was 54 years old, had been sheriff for 12 years, and knew most families in Riverside by name. He took Thomas Hayes aside and asked him to walk through the morning again slowly. Thomas Hayes repeated the same information. Nothing had been unusual. Jennifer had seemed fine. He had gone to work. That was all he knew. "Did you come home during your lunch break?" Sheriff Kendrick asked. Thomas Hayes paused. "No," he said. "Where do you usually eat lunch?" "At the mill, in the break room." "Anyone see you there today?" "I suppose so, the usual guys." Sheriff Kendrick wrote this down in his notebook. He asked if he could see Thomas's truck. Thomas Hayes handed over his keys without hesitation. Deputies examined the truck bed, the cab, the odometer. The truck had been driven approximately 120 miles since it was last filled with gas, according to the odometer and the fuel receipt Thomas produced from his glove box. The distance from the Hayes residence to the lumber mill and back was 24 miles. Round trip for 5 working days would be 120 miles exactly. Clear's throat. As darkness fell on October 16th, the Clearwater County Sheriff's Department organized a search. Volunteers gathered at the high school parking lot, spreading out with flashlights and walkie-talkies. They walked through the woods behind the Hayes property, calling Jennifer's name into the wind. They searched along the river, where the water ran fast and cold over smooth stones. They checked every barn, every abandoned building, every turnoff along the county roads. The temperature dropped to 38 degrees that night. People wore jackets and moved in groups, their breath visible in the beam of their flashlights. Jennifer's white Honda Civic sat untouched in the driveway, the driver's seat adjusted to her height, a grocery receipt on the passenger seat dated October 15th. Inside the house, investigators documented everything with photographs and notes. They found no signs of struggle. No broken furniture, no overturned lamps, no indication that anyone had fought or fled. The house was simply empty, as if Jennifer had stepped outside for a moment and forgotten to return. Thomas Hayes sat at the kitchen table while deputies worked around him. He did not cry. He did not pace. He answered every question in the same measured voice. When Sheriff Kendrick asked if he wanted to help with the search, Thomas said yes, but his body language suggested exhaustion rather than urgency. Those who were present that night would later describe a quality to his stillness that made them uneasy, though none could say exactly why. By midnight, the search had yielded nothing. No clothing, no footprints, no blood, no witnesses who had seen Jennifer after 9:45 that morning when she left her mother's house. It was as if she had driven home, parked her car, walked inside, started making soup, and then vanished mid-stir. The impossibility of it gnawed at everyone who walked through that house. The investigation intensified over the following days. Detectives from the state police arrived to assist. They interviewed everyone who knew Jennifer Hayes. Her friends from church said she had seemed happy, normal, looking forward to Emma's birthday party the following month. Her mother said Jennifer had been planning to make pumpkin bread that week, had already bought the ingredients. The librarian at the elementary school said Jennifer had been there the previous Thursday as usual, had helped a second grader find a book about dinosaurs, had smiled and waved goodbye. Investigators turned their attention to Thomas Hayes with the methodical scrutiny that follows any spouse in a missing person case. They requested his phone records, his financial statements, his work schedule. They asked coworkers at the lumber mill about his demeanor, his habits, his relationship with his wife. The men who worked alongside Thomas described him as quiet but competent. He showed up on time. He did his job. He ate lunch alone, usually a sandwich and an apple, sitting in his truck in the parking lot rather than in the break room with the others. Did he seem worried about his wife? Investigators asked. The coworkers exchanged glances. He didn't really talk about personal stuff, one man said. On October 19th, 3 days after Jennifer disappeared, detectives obtained a warrant to search the Hayes property more thoroughly. They brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted in the backyard near the garden shed, but when investigators dug down 2 feet, they found only the decomposing remains of a raccoon. They searched the attic, the crawl space, the septic tank. They found nothing. They examined Thomas Hayes's truck again, this time with luminol and UV lights. No blood, no hair, no fibers that did not belong. The truck was almost unnaturally clean inside, smelling of pine air freshener and motor oil. Investigators noted this in their reports. They noted that the truck bed had been recently hosed out, though Thomas explained he had washed it the previous Saturday after hauling lumber for a neighbor's fence repair. The neighbor confirmed this story. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about inconsistencies so small they hardly counted as evidence. The way Thomas Hayes had answered the phone when they called him at work, his voice betraying no surprise, no alarm. The fact that he had not immediately rushed home but had apparently finished his shift, clocking out at his regular time of 4:30 before driving home. The way he sat so still in his own house while strangers went through his belongings, his face a mask of patient cooperation. But whispers and unease are not evidence. The polygraph test Thomas Hayes agreed to take came back inconclusive. His alibi for the hours between 7:15 in the morning and 5:20 in the evening appeared solid. The time clock at the lumber mill showed him punching in at 7:32 and punching out at 4:31. Coworkers reported seeing him throughout the day, though none could account for every single minute. The weeks turned into months. The media coverage, which had been intense at first, began to fade. Reporters moved on to other stories. The volunteer search parties grew smaller and less frequent. Winter came to Clearwater County, and snow covered the ground where Jennifer Hayes had walked, had gardened, had lived. The case went cold in the way cases do when there are questions but no answers, suspicions but no proof. Thomas Hayes continued working at the lumber mill. He picked up Emma from Carol Caldwell's house every evening and brought her home. Neighbors saw lights on in the windows of the house on Maple Creek Road. They saw Thomas shoveling the driveway when snow fell. They saw Emma playing in the yard in the spring. They did not see Thomas Hayes grieve, but grief is a private thing, and absence of visible sorrow does not equal absence of feeling. At least, that was what people told themselves. Clears throat. In April of 2002, 6 months after Jennifer Hayes disappeared, Thomas Hayes put the house on Maple Creek Road up for sale. He told people he could not stay there anymore, that every room reminded him of his missing wife. He sold the property to a young couple from Spokane for $12,000 below asking price. He packed up his belongings and Emma's toys and moved 200 miles south to Boise. The moving truck pulled away on a gray Saturday morning, and the neighbors who watched from their windows felt an uneasy relief. Carol Caldwell fought for custody of Emma, but the court ruled in favor of the father. There was no evidence of wrongdoing, the judge said, no evidence of danger. Thomas Hayes was Emma's legal parent, and until or unless he was charged with a crime, he had every right to raise his daughter. Carol Caldwell wept in the courtroom. She told the judge that something terrible had happened, that she knew it in her bones. The judge was sympathetic but firm. Feelings were not facts. In Boise, Thomas Hayes rented a small apartment in a complex near the airport. He found work at an auto parts factory. He enrolled Emma in preschool. To the other parents at the preschool, he was polite but distant. He dropped Emma off in the morning and picked her up in the afternoon. He did not attend parent-teacher conferences. He did not volunteer for field trip supervision. The teachers noted that Emma was a quiet child, well-behaved, but prone to long silences and moments of staring out windows. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt suspicion grow like a weed in the garden of trust, the years that followed must have been excruciating for Carol Caldwell. She saw her granddaughter every other weekend, as stipulated by the custody agreement. She watched Emma grow from a 3-year-old toddler into a school-age child. She asked gentle questions. She listened for any hint, any clue. Emma did not talk about her mother. When Carol tried to bring up Jennifer, Emma would grow very still and change the subject. In Clearwater County, the investigation file for Jennifer Marie Hayes remained open but inactive. Sheriff Kendrick retired in 2005. New deputies came and went. The case was mentioned occasionally in the local newspaper on anniversaries of Jennifer's disappearance, but as the years passed, even those mentions became less frequent. People forgot or tried to forget. It is the way of small towns to move forward, to paper over the cracks that threaten to split the community apart. But Emma Hayes did not forget, though her memories were fragmented, nonsensical, the scattered pieces of a 3-year-old's comprehension. She remembered her mother's blue sweater. She remembered the smell of soup cooking. She remembered a sound like thunder, though there had been no storm that day. She remembered hiding under her bed. These fragments lived in her mind without context, without narrative, surfacing in dreams that left her gasping awake in the darkness. Thomas Hayes married again in 2007, a woman named Linda Marsh who worked as a dental hygienist. Linda had never been married, had no children of her own, and seemed eager to embrace the role of stepmother. For a time, the household on Fairview Avenue in Boise appeared stable, even happy. Emma called Linda by her first name but accepted her presence with the adaptability of children. Neighbors saw them at the grocery store, at the park, at the movie theater on Sunday afternoons. But behind the closed doors of the apartment, tension simmered. Linda began to notice things. The way Thomas never talked about his first wife. The way he changed the subject if Emma mentioned her mother. The way he had no photographs of Jennifer, no mementos, nothing to suggest she had ever existed. When Linda asked about this, Thomas said it was too painful to keep reminders around. Linda accepted this explanation at first, but doubt is a persistent companion. In 2010, when Emma was 12 years old, she began drawing pictures in art class at school. The art teacher, Mrs. Patricia Dunning, noticed that Emma's drawings often featured the same elements: a house with an open door, a woman lying on the ground, a dark figure standing over her, a small child hiding. Mrs. Dunning showed the drawings to the school counselor, who called Linda Hayes to express concern. Linda looked at the drawings spread across the counselor's desk and felt her blood turn cold. "What do these mean?" she asked Emma that evening. Emma stared at the pictures. "I don't know," she said. "I just see it sometimes." "See what?" "The bad thing that happened." "What bad thing, honey?" Emma's face closed down. She would not say more. Linda Hayes went to the public library and searched newspaper archives. She found articles about Jennifer Hayes, about the disappearance, about the investigation that had gone nowhere. She read that Jennifer had vanished from her home in the middle of the day. She read that the husband had been questioned but never charged. She read that the case remained unsolved. That night, Linda confronted Thomas. She asked him directly if he had something to do with Jennifer's disappearance. Thomas Hayes looked at his second wife with the same flat expression he had shown the deputies 9 years earlier. "No," he said. "Then why doesn't Emma remember her mother?" "She was 3 years old. Young children forget." "She doesn't forget. She draws pictures, Thomas. She draws her mother on the ground with someone standing over her." "Children have imaginations." "These aren't imaginary. She's remembering something." The argument escalated. Linda said she wanted answers. Thomas said there were no answers to give. Linda said she could not live with this uncertainty. Thomas said she was being dramatic. The marriage began its slow collapse. Clears throat. In March of 2012, Linda Hayes filed for divorce. In the custody proceedings, she testified that she had concerns about Emma's emotional well-being, that the child exhibited signs of trauma. The court ordered a psychological evaluation. Emma, now 14 years old, met with Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and memory recovery. Dr. Chen met with Emma twice a week for 3 months. She used play therapy, art therapy, gentle questioning. She created a safe space where Emma could explore the fragments that haunted her. And slowly, in pieces that fit together like a terrible puzzle, Emma began to remember. On July 18, 2012, Emma Hayes told Dr. Chen what she had seen on October 16, 2001. She said she had been napping in her room. She said she woke up to loud voices. She said she heard her mother cry out. She said she got out of bed and went to the hallway. She said she saw her father standing in the kitchen. She said her mother was on the floor. She said there was red on the floor, on the walls, on her father's hands. She said her father looked up and saw her. She said he told her to go back to her room. She said she hid under her bed. She said she heard sounds she could not describe. She said when her father came to get her later, the kitchen was clean. Dr. Chen documented everything. She followed protocol. She contacted the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare. On August 2, 2012, a caseworker visited Emma Hayes. On August 6, the caseworker contacted the Boise Police Department. On August 9, Detective Laura Martinez opened an investigation into the disappearance of Jennifer Marie Hayes. Detective Martinez was 38 years old and had worked cold cases for 6 years. She requested all files from Clearwater County. She drove to Riverside and met with the retired Sheriff Kendrick, who still lived in a house overlooking the river. Sheriff Kendrick walked her through the original investigation, through every dead end and unanswered question. "Did you ever think it was the husband?" Detective Martinez asked. Sheriff Kendrick looked at the river. "I thought a lot of things, but thinking isn't knowing." Detective Martinez returned to Boise and began building a case. She interviewed Linda Hayes, who was now divorced from Thomas and willing to cooperate fully. She obtained the drawings Emma had made. She reviewed the psychological evaluations. She consulted with forensic experts about childhood memory and trauma. On September 24, 2012, Detective Martinez obtained a warrant to search the property at 412 Maple Creek Road in Riverside, Idaho, the former residence of Thomas and Jennifer Hayes. The current owners, the young couple from Spokane who had bought the house 10 years earlier, stood in their yard watching as excavation equipment tore into the concrete foundation of their garage. The garage had been poured in late October of 2001, approximately 2 weeks after Jennifer Hayes disappeared. Building permits showed that Thomas Hayes had hired a contractor named Dale Morrison to remove the old wooden garage and pour a new concrete slab, citing structural issues and rot. Dale Morrison remembered the job. He said Thomas Hayes had been very specific about when the work should be done. He said Thomas had helped with the demolition of the old garage himself, working through one entire weekend to clear the space. On September 26, 2012, at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon, excavation equipment broke through the concrete slab. Beneath 3 inches of concrete, wrapped in layers of plastic sheeting and duct tape, investigators found the skeletal remains of Jennifer Marie Hayes. She was identified through dental records. The medical examiner determined that she had died from blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck multiple times with a heavy object. The arrest of Thomas William Hayes occurred on September 27, 2012, at 6:45 in the morning. Detective Martinez and 4 officers from the Boise Police Department arrived at the auto parts factory where Thomas worked. They waited for him in the parking lot. When he climbed out of his truck, carrying his black lunch cooler and his thermos of coffee, Detective Martinez approached him. "Thomas Hayes," she said, "you are under arrest for the murder of Jennifer Marie Hayes." Thomas Hayes stood very still. He did not run. He did not protest. He turned around when instructed and allowed the officers to place handcuffs on his wrists. As they led him to the patrol car, a journalist who had been following the case managed to shout a question. "Did you do it? Did you hurt her?" Thomas Hayes looked at the journalist with the same flat expression he had worn for 11 years. He said nothing. The trial of Thomas Hayes began on March 4, 2013, in Clearwater County, where the crime had occurred. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. They presented Emma's testimony, delivered via recorded video to spare her the trauma of appearing in court. They presented the forensic evidence from the garage. They presented testimony from the contractor who had poured the concrete. They presented the timeline that showed Thomas Hayes had left work early on October 16, 2001, clocking out at noon instead of his usual time, giving him ample opportunity to return home, commit the crime, and dispose of evidence. The defense argued that Emma's memories were unreliable, that she had been coached by her stepmother and the therapist. They argued that the forensic evidence was circumstantial. They argued that 11 years was too long to prosecute a case built on the fragmentary recollections of a traumatized child. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. On March 22, 2013, they returned a verdict of guilty on 1 count of first-degree murder. Thomas Hayes showed no reaction. He sat in his chair with his hands folded on the table, his face empty of expression. Emma Hayes, now 15 years old, watched the verdict from her grandmother's living room in Riverside. Carol Caldwell held her granddaughter and wept for the daughter she had lost, for the years of not knowing, for the justice that had finally, impossibly arrived. At sentencing, the judge gave Thomas Hayes life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas Hayes stood when addressed but said nothing in his own defense. He was led from the courtroom in shackles. Those who had known Jennifer Hayes, who had searched for her in the dark woods that October night, who had wondered and worried for 11 years, sat in the gallery and watched him go. The question that haunted everyone was why. Prosecutors speculated about marital discord, about life insurance, about secrets that died with Jennifer Hayes. Thomas Hayes never confessed. He never explained. He simply ceased to exist in the free world, disappearing into the prison system as thoroughly as he had made his wife disappear. Clears throat. Emma Hayes lives quietly now, her identity protected, her trauma being addressed through ongoing therapy. She has a relationship with her grandmother, with the memory of her mother, with the truth that she carried inside her for so many years before she had the words to speak it. The house on Maple Creek Road stands silent, the garage rebuilt once more, the garden overgrown. This case represents something profound about the nature of memory, of truth, of the persistence of justice even when it seems impossible. Jennifer Hayes did not vanish into thin air. She was not a ghost, not a mystery that could never be solved. She was a woman who loved her daughter, who made soup on a Tuesday afternoon, who was taken from the world by someone who believed he could hide his crime beneath concrete and silence. For those who wonder if speaking up matters, if coming forward with difficult truths can change anything, Emma Hayes is your answer. A 3-year-old child witnessed something no child should ever see, and that knowledge stayed with her, surfacing in nightmares and drawings until finally, at 14, she found the courage and the words to tell what she had seen. Her testimony brought her mother home. Her testimony put a killer behind bars. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard, may still be carrying a truth too heavy to hold alone. Jennifer Marie Hayes is remembered. Her daughter survived. Justice, delayed by 11 years and buried beneath 3 inches of concrete, finally arrived. Sometimes that has to be enough.